live.
We're live. We're live in like 5 seconds.
4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone, and welcome to LinkedIn Live. Today, this is your Sales SOS podcast, and I'm here with your podcast crew. I'm Liz Hyman. And today we're going to be talking about effective sales leadership. So, if you're here with us on LinkedIn Live, thanks for joining us. Sorry, we're a little late joining in. Restream, I seem to have technical difficulties every time I try to start, but we'll get there. Eventually, I'll be a pro. So today we're going to talk about effective sales leadership. And we're going to talk about, let's start and have some fun. And let's talk about what are some of the biggest mistakes that sales leaders make. But first, maybe we should talk about what is sales leadership. So let's talk about what is sales leadership to start. And then in our next episode, we'll talk about the biggest mistakes. And then let's talk about the things that we can do right. And then I want to talk about KPIs and measurement, and how do we use, what measure should we be using to make our sales team effective, and how do we use measurements effectively instead of as sticks. So that's where I want to start. So let's just talk about what is sales leadership, who does it, what's it about, and we're gonna dive into our very first podcast, and I will introduce the crew, and we'll get started. So, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. This is Liz Hyman. I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew to talk about effective sales leadership, and we're going to just start with what is sales leadership. What does it look like? Who does it? How do you distribute the work? Let me introduce your crew. Today we have Daryl Prell, Mike Simmons, Christopher Bowen, Renee Bigelow, and Bryn Tillman. And they are your experts that are going to navigate you through the waters of sales management. And I think that sales management is really rough waters. Like, it's a hard thing to do. Or at least it's a hard thing to do effectively. I think even when you're doing it poorly, it's a really hard thing to do, though, probably. So let's just talk about, what is sales management? What does that mean? What's sales leadership? Maybe go ahead, Bryn, start.
Well, so I think I want to be clear the difference. We're calling this effective sales management, and then we're talking about effective sales leadership, and I think they're two very different things. So sales management is really focused on tasks, day-to-day operations, making sure things are getting done. They'll also set quotas and allocate resources and even kind of manage budgets. They may even oversee like forecasts and performance matrix and KPIs and all those fun things, where I see the leadership role above the management role. Although a sales manager can be a great leader, where they're setting vision and they're inspiring and they're motivating the team and they're creating like a positive and innovative sales culture that guides to the strategic vision, but isn't necessarily as data driven as a manager might be. And I think they're more concerned about developing their people and getting the most potential out of their team, versus a manager who's like hitting like very rigid goals. That's just my first impression of the two.
So let's talk about that a little bit more. Mike, you have that look on your face like you have a thought. What is sales leadership versus sales management? Mike doesn't have thoughts very often. No, just kidding.
I love you're beating me to it. That's awesome. I love it.
Keep the jokes coming. Anybody else want one? Chris, you didn't say your joke. What's your joke, Chris? No.
I'm just going to let it pass.
That's it. That is leadership demonstrated by Chris. So I think when we talk about leadership, my definition is pretty simple. It's how we move forward. And it could be leadership of an organization, how we move an organization forward. It could be leadership of self, how we move ourselves forward. It could be leadership of teams, how we move forward, how we move forward toward something. Management, on the other side, is more of how do we manage the existing processes and keep things moving along in whatever thing that's happening. So we manage processes, we manage machines, and sometimes we treat our people like machines and manage
Selling
those.
machines.
So that's how I like to distinguish between the two. What sales leadership, sales management, then you start to say, okay, well, what is sales inside an organization? Typically, it's a revenue generating function inside the business, either initial acquisition or retention and expansion. So, taking all of those and pull them together, sales management is managing an existing process or people to achieve a desired result in something that has already been created. Leadership is moving all of that forward. It's going to be more of a forward thinking piece. And I think we in general suck at this.
At which?
At all of it, because we don't even know what the sorry, at all of it, because we don't know what we call some things processes, but they're not. We call methods processes. We call processes methods. We call systems something different. So some of them we struggle with language and definition. And if we struggle with language and definition, it's really hard to manage. And we think that we're leading when in reality, what we're attempting to do is force people to do something or say, do it my way or whatever. And many times we don't know what forward is because we lead ourselves toward, we want to go to Disney and someone's leading toward Anaheim. Another person's leading toward Orlando. We're both going to Disney, but we've confused we've confused people.
Let's go back to that in a second. So any more, because I want to talk about what are the tools that we use to lead or manage. So
before you do that, I just want to
Daryl.
offer my view, difference between leadership and management. I'll be far more concise.
Great.
Not suggesting that Mike talks a lot. Leadership is how you interact with your fellow executives, with the board, with the investors. Management is how you interact with your staff. I'll leave it there.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
I would look at, certainly I think management does get into more of the day-to-day execution and how you move things forward. I think when you look at both roles, it's also what level are you working across within your own organization in order to get those things done? Because if you're just strictly focused only on the sellers, you're probably missing a whole lot of interaction points that need to take place in order to actually either get those individuals on your team where they need to be or get the organization moving in the right direction from what we're offering or what happens to be standing in our way. What are we getting back from the field? All those types of things.
Renee, do you have any thoughts before we move beyond this?
Yeah.
Renee is going to, wait, let me just guess. One of the things Renee is going to talk about is employee experience, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Renee, bring us there.
Great guess, Liz. Bryn touched on it a little bit when she mentioned leading with culture, but I think that's a piece, particularly when we get very data driven, that sometimes gets forgotten. And really, sales has, you have the culture of the organization, but sales in general has a little bit of its own flavor of culture, and it requires somebody who understands how salespeople work, how the customers react, what the mindset and the psychology of people who are willing to pick up the phone and call people who they've never talked to before and tell them how they really need these things, right? Like there's a certain amount of culture that really needs to be driven. And it's a little bit different than, the KPIs and the goals and the processes, but it makes all of that happen, right? You have to do those other things too, but without that really good culture piece, and the best sales leaders I have been around are ones who can make it fun and make it exciting and connect what those process changes no one likes, why somebody should be doing them, that it doesn't take away from, it might take away from sales time, but it gives back other things to the company. Those things, right, are I think more important than any of the other things in sales.
So I think all of these are right. And I think it's really important to hear how all of the different people that just talked approach the question, right? So every person is sitting in a different place, and their perception of the end result, we're all on the same page, but we're perceiving it from a different position. And I think that's really interesting. Can somebody be a sales leader can they be a leader and a manager at the same time? Can the same person do both jobs? And Bryn is nodding her head for those of you who are listening. Okay, we got consensus, nodding heads. So let's talk about leadership a little bit, because when we lead, you can't lead by hitting people over the head with what you want them to do, right? It's really hard if you're in front leading to be effective if you're bullying, if you're nagging, if you're using KPIs to bludgeon your salespeople. So how do we lead without bludgeoning, without attacking? How do we lead in a way that's really positive? And then let's talk about managing in a way that's really positive. But how do you lead a sales team? Like, how do you get them to follow? Because I have heard people say managing a sales team is like herding cats. So how do you lead cats? Because I aside from, fictitious stories, I have never seen somebody leading cats.
You have to make it in the cat's self-interest first.
Right. So if you carry catnip, they might follow you.
I'll just jump in and share one thought on this. I find that salespeople are some of the most entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial within an organization. And I find that they generally, if you can make the business case for themselves, right, for how they run their little business within the business, and then connect that to the company because they wanted to be a part of a company and the bigger thing, right, and connect it to the product and the brand, then that tends to be the catnip, right? Like they're very entrepreneurial. Most great salespeople are very entrepreneurial. And I find that really works best. I'm sure other people have great suggestions.
Bryn, go ahead. Thanks, Renee.
So I think there are different flavors of catnip, and you have to figure out which flavor of catnip each of your salespeople are attracted to, right? Everyone is motivated, not everyone, but most people are motivated differently. For me, I'm motivated by an attaboy. Like that motivates me. For other people, they don't care about the attaboy, right? Like everyone has a different motivation. So before you kind of dive into a general, this is how we're going to lead a team, I think you have to figure out what each of your players respond to, right? And a lot of that is asking them. A lot of it is really good observation. And some is when you try something and you get defensiveness, you go, okay, that's not going to motivate. And so often managers that don't have the leadership quality will just stick to this is the way we're going to do something, where a really good leader is going to work with each individual team member, because the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Did I get that right? I wasn't, but
yes, you did.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. So that's my thought around that.
I've heard company leaders say, I pay them. I commission them.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
What more do I need to do? I mean, they get paid really well. Do your job.
Okay, I'll jump in.
Okay,
because I've been taking notes here and stealing everybody's thoughts and then going to repackage them as my own. That's what good marketers do. It's really simple. How do you lead? I think this is simple. And this is my magic 4. 1, by example. You can't expect the sales rep to do something if you're not prepared to go in there and do it yourself, because otherwise they're going to call bullshit on you. But if they know you can do it, then they can't call bullshit. That's number 1. Number 2, with rewards, the catnip, right? It could be commission. It could be something else. And it could vary by rep. You need to figure out what that reward is. Number 3, with consequences. This is where I see people fail all the time. They get 42 chances and the rest of the team is looking and saying, well, why do they get 42 chances? Because their teacher's pet and I got no chances. So you got to be consistent with the consequences. And finally, number 4, this is the culture aspect, with engagement. You need to communicate with them and tell them what's going on, what you're facing, the darts you're taking for them, the expectations from the board, the challenges. Then you also need to communicate up to represent their points of view so they feel heard. So by example, with rewards, with consequences, and with engagement, you do that, they will follow you.
Okay,
typically.
could you do a mic drop? Mic drop. That was excellent. That was excellent. What do you guys think? What are your thoughts on that?
I love I got your back.
I think
Right.
a little bit of what Bren was talking about, I think one of the things to really understand is what is driving that individual seller, and you can bucket them into a couple of different groups typically from what's going to be the primary motivator for that person, and then being able to manage them in that direction. A lot of times I've used knowing what bigger term goals sellers have had on my teams, and when I'm bringing it back to things that I need them to do, I tie it back into that. This is going to allow you to get there, because if you're just talking about company goals and organizational sort of minutia, you'll get some people, but you're also going to lose a fair number of the people on your team, because especially in big organizations, they don't necessarily always feel that connected to the bigger organization because it's just too large, right? They're connected to their team, their region, your piece of the pie, but not necessarily to the overall organization writ large.
So I'll tell you, when I was working for Miller Hyman and I was training organizations like, Hewlett Packard, Coca-Cola, and this isn't specific to those two, but I was working with a bunch of Fortune 500s. And hang on a second. And what I discovered was at every single one of my 2-day sessions, at one point, I had to stop for 20 minutes and let the salespeople tell me all of the things that management was doing to interfere with their ability to hit their goals.
Because they need to be heard.
Failed.
Yes.
They weren't being heard. They didn't understand strategic leadership or strategic decisions to change product or whatever. And so they would say, they want me to succeed, but this technology doesn't work. This leadership decision undermines what I'm doing. And so that's a really good example of being disconnected from the company. And I think in the time that I was doing it, a lot of times I felt like sales felt like they were on an island all by themselves. Yep. And somehow from way out on that island, they're supposed to be driving the lifeblood of this organization, right? Because without the money, the organization is dead. That's no blood. And meanwhile, they're out on an island trying to pump this blood through, disconnected, not understanding, not being heard. And it doesn't work. So as a leader, what I'm getting is we need to make that connection. We need to motivate using a variety of motivators. It's not just enough to give money. You've got to give money. You've got to give praise. You've got to tie it back to what's important to them. You need to know them. That's what I'm kind of hearing in this. You have to know your salespeople. What else? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I think you nailed a couple of points have already been nailed, and just to reinforce them, the simplicity of what Daryl shared and kind of laying things out and being able to evaluate yourself against each of those individual marks, like a score of 1 to 5, and say, am I doing this am I doing this poorly or am I doing this well? Assess yourself against Daryl's framework from a score of 1 to 5. I believe that sales leadership is a very simple thing. It's hard, but I believe it's very simple. And it's actually more simple and maybe even a little bit easier than leading other functional areas inside the business. Because typically the people that are in these roles feel very comfortable communicating. And if you ask the question, they'll be open to sharing it. Now, the challenge is when you ask the question, some of them have no idea how to communicate the answer. They keep saying the same thing, but they're not saying the word. They don't necessarily know what it means, which gets into the Princess Bride inconceivable. Those things will happen inside organizations. And if we as leaders take time to build leadership capability among our team, we'll find that our job as leaders ends up being simpler, easier, less complex, So I don't really, although I just spent 2 minutes adding something to it, I didn't really have much to add to it.
Well, Mike, I think most organizations do a really, really poor job of preparing people to lead or manage. Um, there's not enough emphasis on the soft skills. There's also not enough emphasis on, hey, this thing, sales or whatever function it happens to be, that you used to be really, really good at. These are the things that you did really, really well. You can't do those anymore. That's not your role. This is now what you have to do, and they can be really, really uncomfortable if you're not used to doing that stuff. And I think they don't set proper expectations, and then you get people that get put into these roles, and they flounder a bit because they're not prepared for the people aspect. And depending on your personality, that can be really, really draining, and it can certainly be a huge amount of time that you have to be able to allocate to that on a weekly basis, depending on the size of your team, because you don't know what's coming.
Right. And so we hear this all the time, right? That sales managers and sales leaders were never trained to do that job. They were trained to do sales, at least at a good company, but in most cases, they weren't trained to manage and they weren't trained to lead. So Mike, say what you were going to say, and then take us into how do we train people to be leaders? How do we train them to be sales leaders or sales managers?
Yeah, I think the big piece there, and there's one of my favorite books that talks about leadership in this context is a book called Legacy, which is about the All Blacks rugby team, and one of the quotes that James Kerr uses in the book is "Leaders create leaders." And if we look at this as an opportunity for us to develop leadership inside our organization, develop the future leaders inside organizations, then it becomes more about development of another person rather than me impressing my views upon something or trying to guide or direct too much in that area. The way that we train effectively is be really clear around what the skills are of someone who's in a leadership role. Do we align on what those skills are? Then have an assessment in there to identify skill gaps and then put remediation in place to help address the skill gap. And that skill gap can be addressed through training, can also be addressed through coaching, and it can be addressed through mentoring. And just like we've talked about leadership and management, many times people confuse training, coaching, and mentoring. And we use the words at the same time, but we're talking about something that's completely different.
And maybe in the next segment, we can talk about a little bit more specifically about those components and also about methodologies versus processes and so forth. So what other thoughts do we have on creating leaders? How do we create sales managers that are effective? How do we create sales leaders that are effective?
Liz, I have one. This is Renee. One of the places I see, and you alluded to it with all of the Fortune 500s that you worked with as well, is a critical lack of communication, as particularly for, as you pointed out, when there's a change that the company is making. We're no longer going to sell this product. We're going to change pricing. We're going to go to market a different way, like whatever those things are. And I think part of sales leadership training really needs to be about comms and communicating. Even when we do communicate it, we under communicate it greatly, and we aren't following the basic principles of messaging, which is how frequently we need to say it, how many different ways we need to say it for it to like really sink in, for people to process it in the way that they think. I think that's a critical one.
Yeah, I think you're right. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is this. We see this happen over and over again, especially when they're, shall we say, first-time sales leader. Is they got the role typically because they're good at selling.
Right.
The issue is they've never been given any people skills training. They know how to conduct a discovery call, and they may know how to do the objection handling, but when it comes to people and staff and whining and bitching and moaning and HR compliance and legality and what you can and cannot say, I find over and over and over again, CEOs, COOs, whatever, and HR consistently drop the ball and do not equip these people with any kind of training to make them successful. And then they fail and the team leaves and it's a shit show, using Mike's colorful language. So I think, CEOs, investors, HR needs to step up and equip these people. That's just my soapbox rant.
So let me just lean in for a second to what Daryl just said, which is we know that the number one reason that people leave a company is because of their manager, right?
Yep.
The person they report to. So if we haven't trained them and we have good salespeople, well, you can guess what's going to happen. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's always a real challenge to be able to make sure that you're doing these things, I think, right and consistently, right? Like, I've seen some people who do pieces of the communication fairly well, but they fall apart on other things. They get viewed as playing favorites, which is really, really, I think, easy to do. I don't think it's the right approach. I think you want to be able to be consistent, call balls and strikes as you will, but I've seen it happen way too often, and I think you start to set really, really bad expectations for the team. This could go back to the same person who got 42 chances versus somebody who got 2, right? But the way that ultimately represents to your team is, what's the motivation for high performance outside of the paycheck? If this is what ultimately gets respected or rewarded within the organization.
Yeah.
Think about how we let a sales leader go, just like we were just talking about, because they're not a good leader. They're not performing at whatever metric we've said that they should perform at. Who do we replace them with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you'll end up seeing people will go to, though, if let's say it was an internal hire that you promoted and you did it, then usually the next response is, okay, that didn't work, I'm going to go outside, right? And I'm going to bring somebody else in that came from a different organization, that doesn't know our culture, who doesn't really understand how we do things. And then I'm hoping, because of the names on their resume, that they're actually in a better position to lead. But I think that's still rolling dice, right? Or you're gambling, hoping that it works, as opposed to looking internally and saying, hey, how did we not set this person up for success? Where did we go wrong as an organization writ large, and forcing us to make this decision? Because that's certainly not where you started.
And then, I mean, heck, it's kind of like growing up around your parents. Well, I'm not going to parent like they did. So then I have kids, and then now I parent differently. And then my kids are not going to parent like they did. And we're going to continue to create this whole challenge that continues to kind of work their way around, where whether it's flipping to one side, which is we're going to hire outside, or it's flipping to the other side where we're going to hire inside. What we've done is we put people into roles that we've not prepared them for, which is a lot of what we're talking about here. And then they try to do something completely different that may or may not be right. And then at the same time, we also ask them to be successful, but not give them the resources. And on their side, they feel like, well, I'm going to do better this time because I'm not going to do that same thing. And I'm not going to ask for help. So not only do we not give them the resources as leaders, they don't want to ask for the resources because they don't want to be found out. So we create this giant cycle of the same kind of crap where people just go from one organization to another with all the highlights on their resume and go lead and screw up another team. So you guys have triggered me on a Friday. Thank you.
So I think one more thing to add into this is what is the sales leadership or sales management role in my company? And so just like we think any salesperson is any salesperson and anybody can do the job, we have the same sort of idea about sales leadership or sales management, both. And I often walk into companies who are startups or newer kinds of companies, and they'll say, well, this person worked at Google or HP or whatever. And therefore, and if you are with us, not on video, you can't see everyone laughing. Everybody just stopped to laugh. Therefore, they will know what to do. And the fact of the matter is, you need to hire if you're hiring from the outside, you need to hire somebody who's done the job that you have before. Don't hire somebody who you think is going to somehow magically know how to do it. So let's have some final thoughts on sales leadership, sales management. How do we want to wrap this up? Bryn, Renee, any thoughts?
I mean, I think the wrapping this up is, as you go higher up in the organization, make sure that you are helping your managers lead better and helping your leaders manage better.
I guess the last thing I'll add is we talked about the communication to your team and setting the culture for the team, but I haven't mentioned, and we kind of alluded in a couple places, and it is equally important, communicating back out of sales into the rest of the company, making sure that they understand what's going on, what the challenges are, what you're hearing from customers, what's happening in the market, all of those things, making sure that you are championing sales inside the rest of the company as well.
Any other thoughts?
I'll be the guy that says, people who are sales leaders listening to this, it starts with you being self-aware. Park the ego, park the sense of self that you're amazing, you've always had success, therefore you must be success, and everything you do applies to any other employee, and actually audit your team, audit your coworkers, and get feedback on you and your effectiveness and your ability, and be receptive to it, as opposed to being hurt or your pride or your ego getting in the way. You got Mike laughing. And then take corrective action. If you want to succeed, it starts with you. It's just one more example of leading from the front by example. If you're self-aware, then you can expect your reps to be self-aware.
I think I would add to that, Daryl. I think the one thing that you said in there is, not, if you're self-aware, not assuming that everybody has to sell the way that you did.
Oh,
right?
God bless you, brother.
Like,
yeah.
We're not cookie cutter people expecting that everybody's going to operate, behave. You have expectations that you're setting, but how that people go about executing those things. If you're going to have a level of authenticity, you got to let people be themselves.
Yep.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to finish this segment. Thanks, you guys. Being a great sales leader means being self-aware and guiding your people to do what they do naturally better, right? Okay. That wraps this session. Okay. We're going to do the next session. Let's talk specifically about some of the tools that sales leaders and sales managers have. And that will be everything from technology to coaching to managing to whatever you guys want to talk about. So let's jump into the next segment. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Your Sales SOS podcast crew is going to talk to you a little bit more about sales leadership and sales management. The two are tied really closely together. In this segment, we're going to talk about what are the tools that sales managers and sales leaders have to help them lead effectively. And your Sales SOS podcast crew is Daryl Prell, Mike Simmons, Chris Bowen, Renee Bigelow, Bryn Tillman, and me, Liz Hyman. And so let's just dive in. What are the tools that sales leaders have and sales managers have to help them be more effective? What tools should they be using? What skill set should they be using to manage and lead?
Okay, this is you're going to get a ton of answers on this. We're going to be all over the place. But the one place I will start with, and this is just where my starting point is whoever's in RevOps, become like best friends with them. One of the things I've always done in my sales leadership role is I've gone to the RevOps people and I've said, listen, I'm in 1,000 meetings. I can't look at all the dashboards all the time. I can't drill down all the time. I try to, I really do, but sometimes I don't. I need you to be my second set of eyes. I need you to build reports. I need you to tell me when forecasts seem janky to you. I need to know when it looks like a deal's about to close in 2 weeks' time, but they haven't called them in a month. I need to know all these little details. Can you just give me silent, indicators behind the scene on Teams, on Slack, or what have you? And by the way, if you're sitting in on any of these calls and they're completely blowing up the sales process, I need to know that too. Like, just be my second set of eyes and keep me in the know. That is like the number one place to go, because I just can't do it all. I'll start with that.
Okay, I want to hang on. Mike, I know you have something to say. Hang on a second. So, I want to just distinguish here for a second. Daryl just brought up a really good point indirectly, which is in a larger organization, in an experienced organization, they will have a RevOps team. Many companies haven't gotten to the point where they have a RevOps team. In fact, 20-year-old companies, 40, 50 million, $100 million companies that don't have RevOps teams. So what Daryl just told us is the things we need to be looking at and the things we need to be able to keep the pulse of: numbers, sales process, sales activity, right? As a sales leader and as a sales manager, both, there are indicators you need to be watching all of the time in order to do your job. At the same time, you need to be having relationships with the people that you manage. So there's this balance between keeping a pulse on all of these indicators and keeping these relationships thriving. So Mike, I'll let you jump in.
I think I think about what I do as a leader. Just like what are the things that I have to do on a daily basis as a leader? I have to build a plan to achieve results. So one is build a plan to achieve results. So execute. Number two, sometimes I have to solve problems. Be involved in a problem-solving exercise. Number three, make decisions. We have to make some kind of a decision. So we're building a plan to achieve results. We're solving problems. We're making decisions. And then the fourth one is communicate effectively. And if I could do all four of those things really well, then I'm going to be a good leader, whether it's a leader in a revenue role or it's a leader in another role. So for me, it gets back to those kind of skills. Do we have the skills, tools, resources, all of that stuff associated with being able to do those four things well? And if we don't, then let's address each one of those at a time, not try to do all four of them at once. Because when we try to do all four of them at once, we get ourselves into situations where we tend to apply scope creep to trying to do something that it's not intended to. So that's how I like to think about this.
Liz,
Go ahead, Renee.
I think we're like 5 minutes into this question, and I'm still shocked, but I haven't heard 3 letters. CRM.
I thought you were going to say KPI. So there you go. Which 3 letters?
CRM is also part of RevOps, and that's exactly where I'm going, right?
Yeah. Let's talk about
because
CRM.
you can't have RevOps without a CRM. It's as simple as that.
So maybe it's a good idea to step back. There are tons of people who do have a CRM without a RevOps, though.
Correct.
So I thought maybe we could step back and talk about why companies who are more mature in newer sales methods are investing in a revenue operations team, right? This RevOps. And the reason is in order to make more data-driven decisions, we've become increasingly technical on anything that touches the customer journey. Like I often say that your marketing team is one of the most tech-heavy departments in your entire company. Next to that, in many cases, is sales. You will see a lot of tech running through sales because we're gathering data all along that customer journey that helps us make data-driven decisions, right? And if we're going to build these dashboards and we're going to have all of these things that we track KPIs on and understand where we are and how to forecast all of these things, that all has to come from a central place. The CRM tends to be the source of truth for the central place of data in most companies. And then from there, you have all these other things that you're doing. It becomes a specialty within sales and marketing, or a RevOps if you have, or customer success as well. It becomes a specialty to make sure all of that stuff is working together, and it doesn't take the time of every single person in sales and marketing to just run the software. So I'll kind of land it there and see what you all have to add on that.
I think that makes sense, but I think for me, one of the tools that you have as Leader is your one-on-ones. How are you leveraging those to understand how that individual, that's your chance to really hopefully get more from them, right? What is it that they need? How are you going to be able to help them? Where are the gaps? And not have it be as data driven. Not that sometimes those conversations don't head that direction, but a lot of times you want to be able to understand, how am I going to get more out of this person? What is it that I need to be able to do? What is it that they need to be able to do that either they have a blind spot to, or we haven't put them in a position to be able to leverage that, right? So really being able to understand those aspects.
Okay. So let's back up for a second. So we're talking about two distinctly different things here. One is being able to collect, manage, and understand the data so we can make good decisions. The other is, again, this relationship thing. There's a stat that gets thrown around a lot, which is a manager should be spending, and this is true of any sales leader, at least 30% of their time coaching. That means in meetings, and we have this new kind of culture bubbling up, which is let's not waste time in meetings. But we can't really be good leaders. We can't really support our sales team if we are not having meetings with them. Well, keep them in the field. They got to be on the field where they're working. Don't keep them bogged down in meetings. So this balance becomes really important. So when we're talking about meetings, there's 3 different kinds of sales meetings in my mind. Maybe there's more, but one is the team sales meeting. We have to have that. The second is one-on-ones, and one-on-ones can be broken down into 2 different things, which will make 3 kinds for me. One is this funnel review and coaching. Like, let's go through your funnel and let me coach you through, or your pipeline. Let me coach you through what we see. Let's talk about it. Let's come up with ideas. And the third is the one-on-one that is about, are you hitting your KPIs? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? What development plan do we need to have for you? And how do we get you there? And if we combine management and coaching at the same time, sometimes it's hard for our salespeople to hear us coach, because all they hear is, again, the bludgeon that you didn't do this and you didn't do that and you didn't do this and you have to do this and you have to do that. So we really need to distinguish those 3 things. Do you guys want to take a minute and talk about those 3 different kinds of meetings and how to effectively have them? Like, what should be happening at a team sales meeting? Should we be coaching individuals? Should we be running individual funnel reviews in a team meeting? Mike's going to burst.
Yeah,
No,
I'm waiting for Mike to
you
jump in.
shouldn't. No. I mean, like, every one of those meetings I've ever been a part of when I was an individual contributor is, I hoped someone like me was talking first and took 25 minutes of that 30 minutes meeting so I didn't have to share my information. Right? Like, it was just, let's hope.
So
Please call on Daryl.
I think it becomes a shaming program versus anything that's productive. And I definitely think one-on-ones for that kind of thing. Now, success stories, those I think we should share. And in one-on-ones, when you've got success stories, say, hey, Liz, tell me how that you just closed that really big deal. Or Renee, I just heard you got a conversation with the CEO that we've been trying to get in front of for months. Tell me how you did it. Tell us how you did it. So I think group share is good, but it should all be positive.
So first thing that we agree on is, in a team sales meeting is a great story for people to share their successes.
Yep.
Okay. What else should be happening in an effective meeting? What should be happening? Team meeting.
When you're getting stuck. Like, where am I getting stuck? I'm stuck on this deal. I'm running into this thing. Has anybody ever run into something like this? What would you do? Some like team work around a specific challenge.
So it's a great time for a sales leader to say, hey, I keep hearing that people are having trouble with this objection. Let's tackle it as a team. Or, hey, we've got a really big deal coming up. We're stuck. Let's do a team strategy session. Let's all work together. So these are learning opportunities. And yes, sometimes the more senior salespeople feel like they're always coaching the newer salespeople, but that's okay because when we coach, we learn, right? So sharing successes, solving problems as a team, or strategizing as a team. What other good things should be happening in team sales meetings?
This is a big time for that communicate. Will you bring that frequency back up? Just because you brought it up last week doesn't mean you bring it up. It's like you find a different way. You do it a different way. You say it differently. You tell a different story, right? But you keep repeating some of those things that you've talked about in the past, and you make sure that you're connecting what's going on in the company to what's going on in sales. If there's a product change, if you have a release coming out, if you have so your team is not caught short and doesn't know when they hit the street what's going on, and somebody else learns from somewhere else, right? Like those are some of the things that you really need to make sure are getting across to the whole team.
Okay, so two things. One is product changes, product training, anything that we can do to help the team be better at understanding the products, product changes, technology, whatever it is they're selling. The other is, what is our strategic direction? Where are we going? How does this impact you? What things are happening, and continuing to reinforce, this is our strategy, this is where we're going. What else should be happening?
Yeah, but even I would also just say, even things that aren't traditionally sales and product, right? Like, let's say your CEO recently left. Okay, yes. Like we're gonna get a lot of questions about this. We've had several leaders change. We've had a hack. We've had a whatever the crisis communications is, because your salespeople are going to get that. They're going to be the front line for most of that ire. They're going to get it all, right? And so they need to have some sort of prep and some talking points and be able to ask questions. I think that's one of the places where I see like huge failures. And then the salespeople feel like they've just been thrown to the wolves.
Anything else?
I mean, I think there's the class there to always share a win. You know, why did you win this deal? What were the objections you had? You know, how did you handle that competitor? How did you respond to this objection? Because clearly our solution is weaker than the competition. You overcame it. So just some group learning so the other reps can learn and take that away and apply themselves. It also just leads to great discussion. Great discussion.
This is kind of building on Renee's point around communication across functional teams. One of the things I like to do is share examples of where we're hurting other aspects of the business and where we're helping other aspects of the business. And a really good example of this is we don't put enough of the right information inside the CRM so that the rest of the team can invoice customers properly. We don't have billing contacts in there as an example. And now we're asking the rep to go and chase money. When we can communicate broadly to the team what other functional areas are doing in the business and how we're either helping or hurting them, people start to feel more like this is more than just them out there selling something or working with customers. There are internal customers that we have to work with as well. And I'm a big fan of inviting those internal customers to these kind of meetings and having marketing share something, or having finance share something, or having operations share something, whatever that is, so that sales is not this black box inside the organization.
And two-way communication around that, right? So that also gives sales the opportunity to say, hey, marketing, when you're doing this, it's creating this problem for me. So this two-way communication and planning that in for a discussion. I love that.
Hey, marketing, we love that stuff you're doing. Could you do more? That's what you meant to say, right?
That's what I meant to say.
I mean, I'd even go one step further, because often marketing or product management or product marketing, whomever, or even customer success, they're sending messages to the sales team to say, hey, this is a new feature coming out. Hey, there's a launch coming out, whatever it might be, right? And they can't get time on the calendar to have a face-to-face all the time. So they'll do it, with a pre-recorded video, or they'll do it with an email or whatever, a battle card, etc. I think it's the sales leadership's responsibility in those meetings to physically say, did you read this? And then test them. So others can go, shit, please, as Mike said, please don't come to me. Keep talking because I didn't read that and I'm screwed. In other words, it's up to sales leadership to reinforce the support that marketing and the other teams are trying to give sales to be successful. Because most sales reps will say, well, I don't have time to read that because I'm busy closing deals. And that's just bullshit.
Yeah. And it's true. We've got to get sales to both toe the line and to, we need to get them to toe the line, and we need to reward them for doing well. And we need both. Mike, were you going to say something? No. Go ahead.
That was Renee. I was going to add in that reward category what you and Daryl are talking about. I think it's really important to have leaderboards and rewards for people doing the things that you need sales to do that aren't sales, right? Like if you have sales enablement tools, if you have battle cards and things like that, if you have tech that you've purchased, keeping track of how many people are actually using it, recognizing them for using the tools that you've gotten them. I don't mean shaming other people. I mean, the same thing as a good sales success story, right? Making sure that you're highlighting people who are using the tools so they can explain how it helps them, so that you can say, look, these people are meeting their goals and they say they're using these tools. We got these because, you said you wanted some additional help. Kind of using that kind of gamification for the things that feel like distractions from sales, I find helps a lot. And here's the other thing. A lot of these meetings are not fun. The more you have these like gamification, these like turn your quiz into a quiz show, right, Daryl? Like whatever you can do that makes it fun, that makes people want to come in. I mean, I really like walking into the room and music playing, right? Like anything to make it fun so that people are like, oh, we have the sales meeting today. I don't mean to make it sound too Pollyanna, but I want to feel like they want to come because they know they're going to leave with something important.
This is why I'm not in marketing.
So one of the things that we do in our weekly, we have a biweekly pipeline call, but we have a weekly sales meeting. And one of the things that we share in there is we have two different sellers that share what we call a big idea. And this is really, how do you start to get the customer to think differently about our organization? Because it's real easy when you have a broad portfolio to get pigeonholed and people view you one way and one way only. How do you change that? Well, you're only going to change that if you start to open their eyes to different things. So these are sort of pushing the envelope sort of things, at least within that client context. And then everybody gets to see that presentation, it's 5 to 10 minutes, 2 different people do it every week. And you start to get a different perspective of, hey, I hadn't even thought about that because I didn't know that capability existed, or I didn't know that we did that, or, oh, I'd heard about that, but I didn't, but now it's more real because I hear somebody that's in my role or similar role that's doing that within a customer that looks like my customer. And so, it gives me a different thing to go talk about. And then I can drill into those details and get a little bit more information. So I think those types of things in those meetings can be really, really helpful.
Okay, I love that. Let's jump over to individual meetings. What should a pipeline review or funnel review look like? What should a one-on-one? What does coaching sound like? Let's talk about some of this, because I think this is one of the places we fall down so badly. Brenda, were you going to say something?
Oh, I think that one-on-ones are absolutely vital. But I'm going to go back to what we talked about earlier, maybe even on another podcast, where we talked about how each person is motivated differently. And I think each pipeline should be coached a little bit differently. So there are some people that are just volume prospectors and they throw a lot on the wall and hope that some sticks. And there are some people that are much more purposeful in who's going in their pipeline and how they're having conversations. And I don't think you can measure everyone by the same KPIs. And this is a kind of a big controversy when you're looking at CRM reports and you're looking at we need the right data to be able to compare what's happening. But for me, I'm a quality over quantity. I may only have 4 or 5 conversations with prospects this week, where someone else might have 30, but my 4 or 5 are really the right people in the right place. And so they're more likely to close, and it's a better use of my time. But if a manager, my boss, obviously right now, but if there's a manager over me and the guy sitting next to me and they're like, hey, Bryn, you have a light pipeline, that is not necessarily the best way to coach. Right. So I think that you have to really come up with custom coaching. Now, I know that we need data and I know that we need it across the board, but I think you have to look at, so for me, I'm always talking about LinkedIn and connections. So when I'm from this perspective, and you can use it any way you want, is for us, how many new of the right connections is someone connecting with? How many of those are becoming first conversations? And how many of those are actually a lead that's going to be put into the pipeline? So more than how many calls did you make, or so I think when you're doing pipeline review, it needs to be custom to each individual.
So let me just jump in for a second, Mike, and then I want to hear what you're going to say. So when we're looking at a pipeline or a funnel, which I like to call it a funnel, we have some KPIs that are mega data, right? So this is across our company. This is what we see. And after a while, we can basically see we have this many, you have to have this many in prospecting in order to have this many closed. So we have a standard across the organization, which is a really good bar to start measuring by. But what Bryn's saying is, but if I have one person and I look at their history and their history is their funnel is a different shape and it's perfectly effective for getting the results they need, then why am I beating them up about something that doesn't matter? So let's talk a little bit more about, how do you run a funnel review? So when I run a funnel review, I start by saying, what's the shape of your funnel? So we know this is the math that works for the organization. This is the shape of your funnel. This is what it should look like. If it's somebody who's different, then I need to look at the shape of their funnel. I want to look at the velocity, like how quickly are things moving through? Is there stuff that gets stuck? Is that a certain kind of thing that gets stuck? Is stuff transitioning from stage to stage the way it should? Or is everything getting stuck at a certain stage? So I want to look at sort of these shape questions. I want to look at velocity and flow. But I also want to look at, when I'm looking at a funnel, I look at the entire funnel. So I might do a weekly bottom of the funnel review and a monthly entire funnel review. And then I'm talking about, well, what's going on up here? What's your next activity? Do you have activities? Do you have something besides follow up so you actually know what to do? Like, I'm actually looking at the activities. I'm looking at the individual deals in addition to looking at the overall numbers. So, do you see the same thing? Do you have other thoughts? How do you do a funnel review? Silence. Did I nail it, or did I miss something, Mike?
I care about two numbers, and that's it. And it's evolved over time. But my two numbers, they're iterations of it, so that's where things start to get a little bit more complex. But my two numbers are pipeline created, pipeline developed. What did we put in? How did it move forward? Okay. What did we put in? How did it move forward? What did we put in? How did it move forward? Just kind of hitting.
If you're not putting it in, it's not moving forward.
That's it. And if we're not putting it in, then we solve for the problem behind not putting it in. If it's not moving forward, then we solve for the problem just before it. Now, moving forward is all good. Moving forward out is good. It's not bad. I'd like it to move forward out and won rather than move forward out and lost. But it's how is it moving forward? And if either of those two numbers are being solved for properly, then everything else is kind of working out. There are some other things that you can look at, like percentage of probability across your total pipeline. And how is that percentage changing over time? Ideally, that percentage should increase over a period of time as we get closer to the end of a period of time, might be for the current year. But if we ever get to a point where that percentage is too high, now we've got a big problem, because there's likely going to be a gap at some point in the future where we hadn't put enough stuff in to keep that percentage down. So pipeline created, pipeline developed, and then probability of forecast over the total pipeline would be the third number if you had to have three, and I typically like threes, but pipeline created, pipeline developed are my two big ones.
So I'll go with a different angle. I love everything that Mike said because he's just a rock star. And I said that without laughing. I just want to be clear on that. There's two things that we need to talk about. One is this is a two-way meeting. So it's not just about, what Mike was saying, which is he's, what's come in and what's going on and what's being developed. That's the sales manager asking the rep. I want the rep to actually prepare content on what they want out of that meeting every single week. This is where I'm stuck. This is where I need help. Here's a dashboard or two of my activity of the last week, whatever it might be. I want them to invest time into them, make that meeting work. That's the first part. Second part is I want the actual sales manager to actually be structured in how they do it. So it's great they're asking those questions, but this is supposed to be collaborative. Too many of those sales leaders go in and they interrogate, and then the rep just shuts down. That's the first part. The next thing is often those sales leaders have not taken the time to look at the data to see the activity. So why are they asking the interrogating questions? Because they didn't look at the data, so they're trying to get the answers now. So the sales leader also has to prep for that meeting. Both parties need to prep for that meeting. The questions need to be very focused. If they're too broad, the rep doesn't know how to answer. 9 times out of 10, they give the wrong answer and the sales manager gets upset. And then you have frustration and discord. And finally, I see this happen too many times where the sales leader blows off that one-on-one because they have competing meetings, as opposed to making that meeting sacrosanct. They cannot cancel that meeting. If nothing else, they and their team are responsible for revenue. This is critical. Everything else can wait. So that's just a different angle to complement what Mike was saying.
I love that nobody skips that meeting. And I hear it all the time. I've got something else to do. I can't do this. I've got a client meeting. Unless really and truly that is the only time the client can ever meet with you. Okay. But that's not true every week. It's not true all the time. And if your salespeople are skipping their meetings, it's because you're beating up on them.
Well, and I would sit there and say that if whoever is needing to cancel that meeting has to be the person that's responsible for rescheduling that meeting for that week, unless it's holiday or something like that, right? Like if you're out for vacation, then so be it. But like outside of that, you need to reschedule that meeting to occur that week, whoever is the one that's asking to move it. So that way it's still happening. It shows that it's a priority, and it doesn't get this thing of, oh, well, I'll kick the can down the road for a week on either side.
Yeah. Okay. So we have about 1 more minute and we need to change topics, but what does good coaching sound like? And what does bad coaching sound like? Because I think coaching it's hard. What's good coaching sound like? Go ahead, Brent.
I would sound like a broken record, but it's going to be different for every person that's in front of you. But the goal of good coaching is that there is movement in the right direction after the coaching session, that there's it's not just, hey, I feel good about what I'm doing, but I know exactly what I'm going to do to move deals forward. I know exactly
what I'm going to do to move deals forward. I had to repeat that. This is really important.
Yeah, that's all.
What's good coaching sound like, you guys? What do we need to do as coaches?
What's the definition of coaching? Like what's
Go ahead.
What's coaching mean?
You tell me. What's coaching?
So, I mean, if you think about coaching, what's a coach? A coach is a motor coach. It's a vessel that you put people in to get them from one place to another, right? That's a coach. So if we agree that that's what a coach is, and moving things from one place to another, good coaching helps someone move from one place to another. The challenge is figuring out what's the one place that they're at versus the one place that we want them to go, and is that the right place, and who decides where they want to go. So good coaching, from my view, helps people move from A to B, whatever A to B is.
Right. Well, I mean, and A to B could be, hey, if you're in that motor coach and you're on the side of the road, maybe the first thing is we have to get you back on the right road, right?
Right.
Then we can, and then hopefully heading in the right direction, and then we can start to apply, the right foot and see if we can get some speed behind that.
And let's not try to get them all the way to the end right at the beginning, because we're going to lose a lot of people. And I think that's probably, it's one of the biggest mistakes that we make with coaching is we try to go too fast, or we don't do things in the right order, or we lean toward the thing that we're really good or worked for us on. So we try to coach to that as a way to help move people through.
It's like the person who goes to therapy once and is surprised that it didn't magically fix whatever the problem was.
Well, and I think what's really important here is coaching isn't telling. In fact, I often find myself when I'm in a coaching session, stop and say, I'm going to take my coach hat off for a second, and I'm going to actually tell you what I think you need to do. Right. So when I'm coaching effectively, I'm guiding them to come up with their own answer. If they come up with the right answers, they are much more likely to embrace it, to remember it, to be able to do it. If I just keep telling you what to do, I'm telling you what to do. I'm not coaching you. Swing the ball, swing the bat, hit the ball, swing the bat is not coaching. Okay.
There's a,
and you end up creating this, you end up forcing yourself to be the answer, right? You're not equipping them to do it themselves. So every time they're going to have to come back to you because
and ask what to do.
And it's like, you know, that's so counterproductive for both parties.
You have to ask the question. I think you have to ask the question, like, what kind of coach are we? Are we a swing coach? Okay. If I'm a swing coach, there's going to be things that I see.
To stop for a second. If you're listening to us, you cannot see that Mike is holding up his golf club. Go ahead, Mike.
Typically, I'm holding a version of a golf club most of the time. Or a whiteboard marker. But if I'm a swing coach, it might not be, hey, so tell me a little bit about what you want to do in your game and where do you want to go and what are you trying to accomplish and all these other things. And I ask a lot of questions. I'm going to observe. I'm going to see the action. I'm going to see the activity. I'm going to see, hey, you know what? There's something that's happening in your hand position at the transition from backswing to swinging through the ball. And all we're going to do is make one slight adjustment. That's an adjustment that we're making as a coach to that specific thing. And it could be an adjustment, the type of questions that a rep is asking in discovery. And it's not as much.
Wait, Mike, hang on a second, because that's a try this, right? That's what the coach is saying. Let's move your hands a little. Try this.
Yes. So, and then when we go through that, some people could say I'm training in that environment. I mean, I could argue maybe there is some training. We're starting to retrain the body on where it is and what position it's supposed to be in. And this is where this whole training, coaching, and mentoring thing becomes really complicated. They can fit in different places, but I think the piece, there's sometimes coaching is, let me ask questions and help you get there. Another one is, like Liz just said, try this. Let's see what happens.
Okay. I'm going to wrap up our this session and get ready for our next one. So if you enjoyed this conversation, join us in our next podcast. Okay. So let's talk about mistakes because we love talking about mistakes. Okay. So in our next section, we're going to talk about what are the mistakes that sales leaders and sales managers are making. And we've alluded to some, but let's really dive in. So welcome to this session of your Sales SOS podcast, your sales podcast crew today, Daryl Prale, Mike Simmons, Chris Bowen, Renee Bigelow, and Bryn Tillman. And I'm Liz Hyman. And we are going to talk about mistakes because it's so much fun for us to talk about it, but I think it's so much more revealing for you when you're listening. So let's talk about sales leadership and sales management because we've been talking about both. And let's talk about what are some of the biggest mistakes? What do they sound like? What do they look like? What happens when you do them? So what are some of the biggest mistakes that sales leaders are making out there in the world today?
They're missing their numbers. I'm sorry, that's not a mistake. Shut up.
Daryl, they're missing their numbers.
Yeah.
And if they were really great sales managers, they'd probably be hitting their numbers. So Daryl, why aren't they hitting their numbers?
Oh my God, how much time do we have? Okay, so there's lots of reasons why they're not hitting their numbers. This is now becoming a therapy session for me. This may or not be factual, but I'll feel better when I'm done. The biggest reason they're missing their numbers isn't skill, isn't people communication, isn't systems, All of those are huge. We're going to talk about them. I find the biggest reason they're missing numbers is because too many people who do not understand sales are the ones making the targets that are based on nothing but bullshit and their finger in the wind. And then they expect the sales team and by extension, marketing as well to make it happen. So they're missing the
Mike
numbers.
almost fell off his seat laughing. Like, can we just say that again? You cannot pull numbers from thin air and then get mad at your sales team for not hitting those numbers.
Yes. Now,
this is, I call wagging your sales team. Let's make
it's the tail wagging the dog, right? Yes.
And then get mad.
The issue there, though, it goes both ways, is that sales leadership needs to insert themselves hard, strong, and fast into that process so that the numbers that are ultimately settled on are owned. So it's a two-way street, but that's what I see company after company after company. And, you know, that's a big reason why they're missing it. That's just really, really high level. I know Renee's going to go.
But sales leaders who are good sales leaders are not sitting there quietly when those unrealistic sales goals get handed down. So sales leaders, the mistake is not saying we cannot do that in this market. We cannot do that with the resources allocated. We cannot do that unless, right? So it's our job as sales leaders to make it clear what is required to hit that number.
And
Mike,
go ahead, I want to echo Renee here. The sales leaders need to be, and when I echo Renee, because the podcast has just started. Previous podcasts, Renee was all about the CRM, and I am with her 1,000%, which means the sales leaders need to be as versed in the CRM and the data and the numbers and the history and everything that goes into making a forecast as the CFO is, so that they can actually insert themselves in that process and make valid arguments as opposed to huff and puff and, you know, just try to out intimidate them.
Don't have the first time that you're having the conversation be at a leadership team meeting.
Thank you. Bless you, brother.
Right.
Like, have the conversation with the CFO before you all get into the meeting.
Right.
You know, like, come on, do your job as a salesperson, as a sales leader, and go do that work and kind of figure those things out. And one of the questions I like to ask is, how'd you get there? Show me the math. How'd that work?
Yeah.
Okay. What needs to be true in order to get there?
I cannot tell you how many times I've watched CEOs stumble when asked that question and then try to bluster their way through it, when the reality is the CEO is trying to keep their job because the board said that's not the way they want it, because the investors are looking to cash out.
Because somebody read a book. Somebody read a book that said your quota should be 5x your OTE. So if we're going to pay our reps $250K at OTE, they should be generating $1 million in actually my numbers are wrong. So 200K OTE, $1 million. Simple math.
Oh, and by the way, we're going to cut marketing and then increase our sales.
Who's marketing? What do you mean? Marketing gets measured on MQLs.
Yes.
What's an MQL? Does anybody even know what an MQL is?
Renee does.
I think these crazy numbers. I think the crazy numbers, not grounded in the market, right, are pretty typical. But there are two extremes that I usually see. There's the three. There's the wild ass guess, right? Like that happens. Like this is just what we think. We think this is kind of fuzzy math. This is what we think. But the two extremes I see much more often are the larger the company and the more mature the company is, the more there are very sophisticated forecasting tools, market forecasting, things like that, where you really can zero in on whether or not you think it's going to be an up year, a down year, what's happening, and then come up with a plan to change it. On the other end of the spectrum, you have startup culture, which is simply, it's always 200x, right? Like that's startup math. It's always 200x. And that's not based on increasing an investment in marketing, adding more salespeople, anything else. It's just, that's your number, right? So I think it's important to know that those three areas are probably like more predominant in number settings. And when Daryl says people can't hit their numbers, understanding where these three weird sets of numbers are coming from, I think is very helpful.
What's even better is when you go hire the new VP of sales from Oracle and they come in with their numbers in this startup.
Yes. There's nothing like a leader from a dominant brand where 90% of the leads are inbound with zero selling coming in and telling us. I love when that happens.
I want, Apple spends X% of their total revenue on marketing. We only want to spend that percent. Okay. You're Apple, right?
Well, I several years ago when I was in-house, we kept running up against Monday.com as a competitor. And like, there was no way we could outmarket Monday.com. And it was just like, I kept hitting my head up against a wall. They go to IPO, and in their disclosure, it's something like 120% of revenue that they're spending on marketing budget.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, you have to understand that you have to find some numbers that are relevant to your situation, to your team. Whether if you don't have a lot of data because you're relatively new or you've changed your go-to-market, then you have to look to data in the market. You can use the BLS, you can use other information sources to get some sort of forecast on your market. There's a lot of things that you can do, but it needs to be a little bit more grounded in reality.
I had a similar experience in just sharing for the audience. You can where to go and look to argue. Where we were a number 3 player in the space. I won't name names to protect the innocent, competing against the number 1 player, which was a public company, and everybody else in the space was just dying, not hitting their revenue numbers. But the number 1 player comes out and they got 160% or whatever of target. Look at us. So the argument from the investors was, your excuses are bullshit. Look at the number 1 person doing it. If they can do it, we can do it. When you actually looked at the numbers, you saw 95% of their revenue growth came from an install base, not new sales, the install base, which means we were way outperforming them on new sales. But our investors didn't want to hear that. Those were excuses. So that's why you need to be wise, guys. You need to drill down and be part of the numbers. You need to become best friends with the CFO. I'll say it again. I've said it before. You need to be best friends with the RevOps people so you can understand the data.
Yeah, it is very easy to fail alone in these kind of conversations. Like, you just go out there and you don't ask questions, and you make assumptions and you run with things. And then all what you're doing is you're getting yourself into a situation where you've set up your business and you've set up your people and you've set up your customers for failure. And I'll throw a number out. I hate venture capital. Absolutely despise the VC space, primarily because everybody in that group is measured by a certain rubric or a certain set of numbers, yet what percentage of them are actually successful? So we're going to go ahead and measure everybody off of this rubric, and our success rate is 1 out of 10 if we're really, really lucky that they get to a point where they do something interesting, and maybe 1 out of 100 that get to a point where they IPO. But we're all going to measure ourselves off the same metric. How does that make any sense? And Liz, you're muted.
Sorry, I had some craziness in the background here. And it doesn't matter to them. To many VCs, they only care about the 1. And so what we need to understand as leaders of companies and as sales leaders, that if we are part of a VC experience or enterprise, that their biggest concern is how fast can you grow and how much can we make when we flip. And so let's move away from that for a moment, because that's one version of business. And let's go into the other version of business, which is run by a group of people who are growing a company to continue and survive for the purpose of achieving whatever their mission is, whether it's, improving health or improving safety or having fun, whatever it is. Let's think more about those companies. And as leaders in those companies, what are the mistakes that we're making that are undermining our ability to achieve?
At which stage, Liz? Like, are we talking about the? I've got a family-owned business that I've been operating for 20, maybe 30 years, and the kind of mistakes that would happen there, or are we talking about something a little bit different? Like, where are you?
Like the mid-market firms.
Yeah, let's talk about mid-market to start.
I think one thing that I see pretty regularly in mid-market is when you want to see whether you're at a plateau or you're trying to scale to the next level, you're trying to get there, understanding what kind of investment you need to make in marketing or sales to get whatever that growth is that you want. And then secondly, what is the roadblock that's kept you from getting there before? I feel like there's a little bit of magical thinking and okay, we're just going to grow. We're going to add a product, or we're going to add a distributor or another channel. And that'll be the answer to all of our problems. When there's a little mix of what's the roadblock that's kind of kept you there. If you do have a history like that, it's kept you from getting over that plateau. And what kind of investment do you think you need to make in order to get to that next level?
So I'm going to just stop for a second because Mike asked in the chat, what's mid-market? And that really could be anything, right? So, we have SMB, this category. Small business is often privately held, small, $2, $3, $10 million. When we get into mid-market, we're often talking about companies that are 50 to say 200 million. And you could even go larger than that. So, when does it switch from mid-market to enterprise? Well, we could have this conversation for hours, but let's just kind of look at this sort of mid-size, often privately held business, and use that as our measure. Sorry, Renee.
No, I think that, I shared my point. I think you definitely clarified it well. I think that 25 to 50 million up to 200 to 500 million, it's a huge difference in the beginning of that scale and the end of that scale, but it's not Fortune 500 and it's not a small mom and pop, right? You're generally talking over 100 employees, definitely over 50, right? You're talking, usually at least 5 years of history. So you have some data, you have information, right? It's not your startup culture either.
Yeah, and one of the challenges you run into in that stage is you're starting to get to the point where you can have people inside the organization who can hide. At the smaller stage, you don't really have as many places to hide. Like everybody kind of does a little bit of everything else. And so you get into these bigger organizations and you start to, people can hide, you start to specialize, you start to look at trying to create scale, and you also start to look at how do I both keep the business running and create a space for a lot of growth, take some risk. And as leaders, I've made mistakes in this area where you try to operate in the keep the business running area and try to do more innovative things in the keep the business running, where your innovative stuff should be over here in this let's test and not screw up the thing that actually keeps the lights on and keeps people fed and keeps people employed inside the organization. So there's this really crazy balance of stuff that happens, and you start bringing new people into the business. People start to get jobs taken away from them that they really like. Like, hey, I really like that I used to be able to go out and do marketing copy on a website on my own. And now in order to do it, I have to go talk to Renee before I push anything live. So there's all of this this is that whole tension that Liz was talking about early on, where it just is this messy agitation cycle inside an organization and across your people. A really cool space to operate in.
I think one of the things, sorry, Liz. I think one of the things that you have to look at there is also as you're getting larger and trying to move, you'll start to get a whole lot more people that become really, really interested in the data that's in your CRM and what information they would need in there in order for it to be more valuable for them. And then they're expecting your people to plug that information in and do all this other heavy lifting for them without an understanding of how that's really going to impact usage, adoption, the value of that data as it's getting input, because a lot of times it ends up being really, really bad data because the people putting it in don't understand what you're really looking for and why you need it and why it's important.
So when we were talking about CRMs in one of our earlier episodes, if it is not easy for the salespeople to use, if there are not a reasonable number of questions, they will not use it effectively and the data will be worthless. So we have to remember that when we're setting up the CRM and we're engaging the whole organization in what they need, that we have to make sure that the salesperson isn't the data gatherer for the entire company.
Well, Liz, can I just also add, because you and I have both seen this in clients we've worked with together, it also has to work for sales. It can't be a tool for another department, right? It can't be accounting's tool first, right? Like it has to work for everybody, but if it doesn't work for sales, then the data will never make it in.
So from a sales leadership mistakes problem, one of the biggest problems is setting up the CRM poorly, letting other parts of the company drive what sales is allowed to do. One of my clients did not allow sales to add new companies without them being credit checked, right? What are you doing when you set up that CRM to undermine the success of the salespeople? And I want to go back for a second before we get too far into CRM. This idea of, as a sales leader, as a company leader, as a sales manager, when we're testing things out, how serious are we about testing them out? I have heard this over and over again from salespeople. Oh, we just wait until the CEO tells us for like the 6th time in a month that they want us to do something before we actually go ahead and make that change. Because every time we talk to them, they have some new exciting idea. And 2 weeks from now, they forget and tell us to do something else. So we've just stopped implementing all those crazy changes. So the CEO just assumes it didn't work. So let's try something else. And you can't, on a sales team, it's like kind of like an elephant. You can't just change direction quickly. You have to move them, and you can't just keep shifting back and forth. Try this, try that, do this. Oh, go back to this. Oh no, try this. It doesn't work. It's a really bad leadership.
You're bringing back a lot of scarring here, Liz. Way to go. I'm gonna need some therapy. I have in my past worked with a CEO who was convinced they were the smartest person in the room and literally changed the strategy every 3 months. And when you called them on it, they instead project it back to say, no, you just don't understand. And it was never their fault. It was them. And when you drill down on it, you realize they're actually scrambling in response to pressure they're getting from the board, but they don't want to admit that because then they feel like they're going to come off as insecure or whatnot. And they have this self-image they're trying to project. That individual needs a whole lot of therapy. Unfortunately, that individual is very, very, very common. So this is, we're going back one step. In a sales leadership role, if you're, senior in the ranks, if you're a CRO, a VP sales, what have you, you need to talk to the board, not just the CEO. They want to talk to you because you need to understand how to basically manage up so you can stop some of these things, such as constantly changing product roadmaps, go-to-market plans, forecast numbers. So welcome to the big boys and girls club. It's not about sales skills at this level. It's about how to manage expectations and get alignment and consensus.
And can I want to go back to why is leadership changing the plan every 3 months? Why are they scrambling? Why are they frantic? And this goes back, Renee, I want to hear your thought. I have one thought, which is, do you understand the data in your CRM? Do you understand what your funnel needs to look like? Have you done the math that says we need this many MQLs, marketing qualified leads, we need this many SQLs, and we need them this far in advance? If you don't have some idea of what's going to happen 6 months from now, if you have a 6 or a 9 or a 12-month sales cycle, then you're always going to be scrambling. You will always be scrambling and making crazy decisions to make up for what you should have been thinking about 6 months ago. Renee and Bryn had something. I don't know who wants to go next.
I wanted to share because I think this is so apt here. And I read this last week in an article I was reading, and it's Cantor's Law. It's everything looks like failure in the middle.
Right.
And I think that's like when you say, why are we changing things every 3 months? And, so we're talking about strategies, this, and you have a sales team who's like, well, just wait because it'll change again, right? Like everything looks like failure in the middle because you got to give it time. And especially if you're in something like B2B, you just assume your sales process is longer than you ever realize it is, because it's way longer than before your salesperson talks to that lead. That whole journey starts long before that, right? So a lot of times you need time to see how long it could take. If you have a 1-year customer journey, I'm not talking about your sales cycle now, I'm talking about your customer journey. When they start thinking about they want to solve a problem, when they start seeing what's out there, then evaluating different tools, whatever, right? That could easily be a 1 to 2 year timeline. And if you've made a change that's going to affect your top of funnel, you are not going to see that change for a while. So that this Cantor's Law, it was shared in Harvard Business Review. Everything looks like a failure in the middle was something I shared on LinkedIn. And I was like, I have to quote that a lot because I think it's something we all need to hear.
Bryn, what did you want to add?
So, so I want to kind of yes and this and say, from a salesperson's perspective on marketing, we need content that's much earlier in the sales journey to accomplish what everyone's talking about, what Renee is talking about. Right? We need to attract our buyers way before they know they need us. And so marketing has to do a really good job of identifying the entire buyer's cycle all the way back to the first the very first right? Why? When they start to Google a solution, we need to be the one that they're finding as early as possible. Corporate Visions, I think, did this study, if I got it wrong, and I think it was Corporate Visions that 74% of buyers choose the sales reps that, I'm sorry, 74% of buyers chose the company or sales rep that was first to provide value and insight. It's first, right? So how do we get there first? How are we enabling our buyers to see us as the thought leaders first? So I think a lot of that early decision making, that early, like way before we talk about our solution, we have to talk about their problem.
And I think that's all really important. I also want to go back to the way we measure things in the CRM. So when I ask a CEO, how long is your sales cycle? And they tell me 3 months for a business to business complex sale. What I know is that from the time they write the proposal or have come to agreement on what the proposal should be, it's 3 months. Because the way CRMs are set up, many companies haven't figured out how to measure the top of the funnel and what the true pipeline timeline, what the true sales process timeline really is. And if you tell me 3 months, I'm guessing it's a year. And I'm almost like, I can almost say 99% of the time, that's what I see. You tell me 3 months, it's a year. You tell me 6 months, it's probably 18 months. You tell me 6 weeks, it's probably 6 months. And that's even before, Renee, the top of the funnel, which is that what I call the engagement funnel, where they're learning about and thinking about our solution before they ever communicate with us.
Yeah. I mean, like most research will say somewhere between 75 and 90% of people have already narrowed down their choices before they ever speak with a salesperson now. Right. So that life cycle that you're talking about is far longer than what shows up in that. If you're just looking at from proposal to close, right? If you're just looking at that, it's just a small speck of that entire spectrum.
And I think that's one of the reasons that we're getting panicky, right? We think it's a 3-month sales cycle. There's not enough in the top of the funnel. Nobody's been looking at it. We don't really know what to measure. So we're just frantically trying to do things that are going to impact what happens 3 months from now. But we're 3, 6, 9 months too late to affect what's going to happen 3 months from now.
This is where I want to jump in and say, for all those sales leaders who are interviewing for a role, this is when you should be doing the math before you ever accept the role, because this is your one chance to set expectations. Because again, building what Liz says, it's not a 3-month cycle, it's a 9-month cycle. Or building what Renee said, it's going to look crappy in the middle. And do I have your commitment until the end? So don't be naive and excited about the opportunity. Do your due diligence, or you will pay the price and you will be miserable and you will leave within a year.
And to add to that one,
Yep.
a question to ask in that due diligence phase, what's the source of these deals? How does sales
Love
cycle
that.
change based on source? Because if your CEO, who is amazing at networking and has a great network and is the person who's leading sales, founder-led sales, and they've been able to do it and they just haven't been able to find the right sales reps to come in and sell the way that they do, then run.
Run.
Don't even stop. Don't be the first mistake that founder makes, unless you have a lot of patience, a lot of grit, and feel very comfortable being very direct.
Okay,
Run.
let's wrap this up there. Thanks for joining us for the Sales SOS podcast. Let's switch gears now. So let's talk about KPIs. We only have about 15 minutes. So let's dig into this, because I think we've alluded to it, but we haven't really been clear about it. So, hey, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. Today, we're talking about sales leadership, effective sales leadership. And right now, we're going to really dig deep into KPIs. Like, KPIs is all we're hearing about. We might be using different terms, but what exactly do we mean? Do we need to be measuring in order to help our sales team to be effective? And your Sales SOS podcast crew is Daryl Prell, Renee Bigelow, Bryn Tillman, Mike Simmons, and Chris Bowen. And I'm Liz Hyman. And we are going to dive in really deep right now to KPIs. What are the things we should actually be measuring, regardless of whether you call them KPIs or success measures or whatever else you might call them? What do we really need to measure? And I ask this because every single sales organization I walk into, their KPIs start with number of phone calls per day, per week, per month, and number of meetings. And if we get those right, everything else is good, right? Okay, Chris is laughing. Mike is shaking his head. Daryl's just giving me a look like I've lost my mind. Go ahead, Daryl.
I want to laugh. All right. So what do I do while Liz is opening it? I always have to look at other places. I Google sales KPIs. And now this is not planned. You heard what Liz just said. I'm not going to name the article I saw. These are the first ones on their list. Number one, how many trials, how many sales qualified leads, how many sales opportunity, number of demo calls, and it goes on. So anyway, I'll shut up. That was it. Well done, Liz.
So what should we measure? What should we measure if it's not the number of phone calls? And like, one of my favorite examples of why the number of phone calls don't matter is this young woman who I actually met on Clubhouse, where I met all of you, and you may have been in that conversation. And she said, I sell more, I hit my quota, exceed my quota, I sell more than anybody else on the team, and I'm in trouble every single day because I haven't made enough phone calls.
I love that.
You guys remember that one?
Yep.
Like, why would you, this goes back to what Bryn was saying early on. How do I fill my funnel, and how do I move stuff through my funnel? And what are my numbers that matter? What are my KPIs that matter? I have a client who they didn't count meetings. They had to have a certain number of meetings, and they didn't count unless they were 45 minutes long.
Yeah. God.
Right? Which has nothing. Mike is laughing so hard, right? It doesn't matter what my client wants. You have to have a certain number of meetings with clients, and they have to be 45 minutes long. Like, so what if those aren't the KPIs that matter? What are the KPIs that matter? How do we coach these people who are listening to us on setting KPIs that really matter?
Well, I mean, to your point, and again, I'm just throwing it out there. I want to see the response from the group. What's interesting is, this article, it meant the second one I mentioned was sales qualified leads. And why I do like that is You could have a 45-minute conversation and it not be sales qualified. It could be marketing qualified, but not sales qualified, right? Or you could have a 5-minute conversation and it's sales qualified. You could have an email exchange and it's sales qualified. That's where sales qualified leads. And this always goes back to the terminology and definitions you use in your organization. But in this example, that's interesting. How many SQLs did you create this week? It's another way of saying, how many conversations did you have that actually are going to be added to the pipeline? Oh, Mike, for those who are just listening, I have to warn you, Mike is on his whiteboard. So there we go. You've been warned.
Okay, Mike, are you ready?
I mean, we said it a little, or I said it a little bit earlier, but pipeline created, pipeline developed.
Yep.
And my head's in the way. So I got to kind of like, I'm losing this whole mirroring thing, but so pipeline created, pipeline developed. If we just know those numbers at its base level, when we're talking about sales, what did I add in to the top of the funnel? What Liz talks about, what moved forward through our sales process, and sales process specifically around increasing probability of sale based on a deal moving from one stage to another. Demo is not a stage.
Wait, could you repeat that?
Demo is not a stage.
Thank you. Demo is not a stage. Demo is an activity that happens in a stage. And if you have a business to business complex sale, which means there's multiple buyers and a long sales process, demo is not a stage.
Amen.
You're just messing with people right now. They're going, what the hell?
I know, they're turning it off. Go ahead.
They are.
Brian.
So I think when we're coming up with this, and I keep going back to this customization, we need consistent KPIs for each of our reps. So even if they're not consistent across the board, I need to know what makes Mike successful and what are the KPIs I'm going to measure that play on his strengths. So I think that I know that it makes it hard, especially in enterprise sales teams. I work with much smaller sales teams typically, so it's easier to do. But even from a coaching perspective, when you're looking at KPIs, if I know, Mike's, his success comes from referrals from other clients, I don't care how many phone calls he makes. I want to know how many referrals did he get. But, so I think that's where we have to, as managers and as leaders, just like we customize or tailor the buyer's journey, we have to tailor the sales rep's journey. We have to make sure that we are leading them in a way that optimizes their talents.
So as sales leaders, we have to start by understanding if we have multiple sales reps, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, we have to have some mega data, right? We have to have some bigger picture of what the organization looks like and what the KPI should look like. And I think what I call funnel-based KPIs is kind of what we're talking about. If I have a sales rep that can't figure out how many phone calls they need in order to put the right number of leads in the top of the funnel, then I might need to help them and set up a KPI for that so they can get there. But truly what matters is if I know on average it's 10 leads in the top of the funnel, which probably means we had to have, 1,000 engagements on the website. 100 engagements on the website. My math is bad. So we have 10 leads that has to come into the top of the funnel for one to close. If we use that as a standard number, and then we say, okay, then what's really true for my company? How many have to go in the top of the funnel for one to come out the bottom of the funnel? And then I can adjust it for an individual sales rep and set their KPIs accordingly. But if I then focus on number of meetings and number of calls, instead of focusing on how much are you putting in the top of the funnel, how much has moved from qualify or from prospect to qualify, how much has moved from qualify to solve, which are the terms that I would use, and how many have moved to closing or best few or whatever you want to call that, and how many have actually closed. And if I'm looking at all of those numbers and I understand the ratios, I can set up KPIs around those that are way more effective than how many phone calls did you make. And I think the phone calls come in when you have teams that are too immature or who aren't hitting their numbers and need some guidance and Chris, you're nodding your head. Do you want to add something there? I know
No,
Mike's ready.
I agree with that. I've said for a long time that if all you focus on is what I would term as counting metrics, right? Number of phone calls, you may end up getting compliance, or you'll get bad data into the CRM showing that you had compliance, but you're not going to necessarily get the data that you're really looking for. You're not going to get the process that you're looking for. And I just think it ends up being one of those that ends up coming down to the beatings will continue until morale improves sort of situations, right?
Liz, can I add in a couple of thoughts for KPIs, because I know we're kind of tight on time. I think it's also really important to have team KPIs so that you get and whatever that individual contribution towards the team KPI, however you want to measure that, because it's pretty typical to see there's one high performing sales rep that makes everybody's world horrible in the sales department, right? And being a part of the team is still a big piece of it, right? You can't, I'm gonna use one of those words. You can't be an asshole and be the top seller and not disrupt the rest of it, right? So these team KPIs, how much are you contributing to the success stories? How much are you helping share information that comes back? Whatever you determine is right. But I think that that's a critical thing to get people operating as a team and to celebrate that success as a team. And I also think adding in some cultural type KPIs, things that tie to the culture of your company, that tie to your values, having that as part of it as well, I think is a really big deal. Obviously, with sales, revenue is paramount, but those other things can mean your team operates as a machine or as a high friction, everything disjointed kind of operation. And I think, you mentioned favoritism earlier. A lot of that comes out with assigning leads, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
if this is a good lead or a not lead. Those KPIs, those culture and team KPIs are often the best way to determine who gets those leads, right? And you can remove yourself from favoritism because you can say, well, they did all of these things. They earned these leads, right?
So just really quickly, that is another KPI that you could measure. One of the things that Renee said is what's the longevity of the clients that I bring into the organization, right? So on average, do my clients stay a year and disappear, or do they keep growing in the company? We tend to measure sales rep until something closes, but if they're constantly bringing the wrong people in who are difficult to work with and go away quickly, that's not great either. What other thoughts do you guys have on KPIs?
Give your team the space to create their own KPIs. Have something simple. Like we've talked, we said it earlier, pipeline created, pipeline developed. Let's say those are the main ones that we have to operate the business. We need to know what we're putting in at the top of the funnel and how things are moving forward. Well, let's get the team involved and have them figure out their own individual KPIs to help achieve the objective that they're looking to achieve, and then assess against those things. Because what they might realize is the thing that they thought was important really wasn't that important, and it didn't matter. And if they move the metric up, but they're not getting the results, then now they can start to think critically, make some decisions, and start to do something a little bit differently than they did before. So get them involved early and often. Don't create these things in a vacuum, and certainly don't create them because you heard them on a podcast.
Building upon Mike said, get them involved early and often. There's lots of, like I mentioned, I just did a quick Google. There's lots of resources out there. Your CRM provider probably has some built-in templates. You can just find a whole bunch of them. What I would say though is you need to have dashboards set up in the CRM for your reps to self-monitor that, of course, the bosses, sales managers, sales leaders can also see as well. And then make that part of the one-on-one review when you're trying to assess, what have you developed and what have you added to the pipeline, using Mike's terminology. Because too many reps, I find, ignore the data. They just want to go on gut. They want to wing it. And I think you need to use the dashboards as a vehicle to pull at the loose threads and get them doing their own analysis and tracking their own progress. Get them to own their results. Get them to own their data. Bryn's got her hand up. Bryn, over to you.
Bryn's got to run. She's saying goodbye.
Oh, she's saying goodbye.
We're running a little long today.
There we
Chris
go.
and Bryn have left us, but maybe if we can spend another minute or two and wrap this up, that would be great. I also think that part of KPIs is, and setting my own individual, is what development do I need as a person to be more successful as a sales rep? So do I need to get some help with asking good questions? Do I need to read a book? Do I need to learn a methodology? Do I need to learn more about our products? That's part of the KPIs that the individual sales reps need to be measured on, because they will never do that work to improve themselves as sellers if we don't measure them on that. Mike's smiling. Any other thoughts on KPIs?
So many thoughts, so little time.
So many thoughts.
I think you call up Liz, you call up Mike, and you say, help us with our KPIs. That's the fastest path. There you go.
I agree.
I give a good parting thought, Liz, and that is to celebrate. Know when you're in the green. Know when people are hitting things. Make sure you celebrate. I've never, ever seen a team more intrinsically motivated by gamification and celebration of wins as sales teams, right?
Yeah,
like make it fun.
There's never enough celebration.
Right. Bring in goodies for the sales meeting. Blast the dashboard up if it's on green for when people enter the room. Like, make sure that's getting out to other departments, that they know there are successes going on, so that they get those attaboys outside of sales too, right? Like, all of those things, I think, help. There's a ratio. I can't remember the exact ratio, but there's a ratio of compliments, right? And, there's this bad advice out there that you should sandwich it, right? Good, bad, good. And that is nowhere near enough for human psychology. It needs to be somewhere around like 10 to 15 to 1. Like, you should be saying 10 to 15 things you've done right before you tell somebody something that they should adjust or fix or that they did wrong. And all of those celebrations are a chance to hit those numbers, so that when you have something else to say, like, it feels like, okay, this is how we win, not, oh, you're picking on me.
And what do we celebrate, right? It's not just, hey, you closed a deal, or hey, you hit your KPIs, but how about, hey, great job getting that person on the phone. We've been trying for months. Way to go. Yep. Hey, great thing that you just learned that we're going to add to the way we do things. We need to be celebrating all kinds of successes. And Mike says 12 to 1 ratio. When I worked with the American Cancer Society for a while, and they said that a volunteer does not hear thank you until you've said it 3 times. Right? So at the very least, 3 times when somebody's done something that you're proud of, and making time. It's just like raising kids. Your kids only hear that they're in trouble because they didn't clean their room, or they didn't wipe off the counter, or they were late for school. They're only in trouble. They don't get enough, hey, great job doing this. And so we're all human beings.
That incremental too, right? Like, I mean, if we're assigning a quarterly goal, an annual goal, like that's a long time to celebrate success. So can you break it down to this week if you're having weekly sales meetings? Like, what happened last week? What are those successes? Can you break it down into, smaller numbers? Like, if the goal is 100,000, when you hit 10, there's some sort of little mini celebration, and I don't mean like bonuses, but small things that make a difference. I will never forget one of the most high impact exercises I've seen somebody do during a moment of needing to push sales at a high stress moment was literally putting a wall of balloons. I'm sure y'all have heard this everywhere. And you put money in the balloons, and every time you hit one of the activities that is in this list or whatever, you get to go pop a balloon, and there could be $1 bill in there. There could be $100 bill in there. There could be a 5, or I've never seen people who made really good livings, salespeople, like the top salespeople, mid 6 figures, wanting to pop a balloon for, the chance at $100 bill. Like, it's really easy to add in that kind of incremental success So it's not so long of a horizon or so high of a number.
Any last thoughts on KPIs before we wrap up today's session?
What I heard was that Mike hasn't told me 3 times how awesome I am, and I'm upset about that.
Daryl, you're awesome. Thank you for being here. It's amazing to see you, and you've absolutely made my day. So thank you, Daryl.
I feel like this is KPI therapy right there. You're the man.
So keep it freaking simple.
Yes.
Don't have 12 KPIs when one will do. Yeah, and what I like to do is look at it as no more than 3 at any point in time. Because if we're doing more than 3, it's really hard to keep everything in focus. You don't know what to keep in focus. So simplify by reducing. Use a model that we talked about a couple of weeks back, or in some of these discussions back, the role reflective model. What, so what, now what? And if you struggle with defining the what and struggle with defining the why and have nothing that you're going to do as a result of seeing that KPI number, then it hasn't earned a right at the table. It hasn't earned a spot in the CRM. It hasn't earned a place on the board deck. So simplify, please.
Mine would be,
go ahead.
Mine would be simple. It'd be use the KPIs to affect change to achieve your goals. Too many leaders and reps know there's dashboards there, but just never look at it. And it kills every marketer, every RevOps, every bean counter out there. Actually use them to affect change.
Renee, you got one?
Sorry, I will end with the celebration. Because I think that point is so big.
Love it.
I think too many times I've seen people saying, well, our sales teams hit their goals, but they didn't hit their KPIs. So then it's time to
the same.
Right? So it's time to go back and look at, are the KPIs that we're measuring really supporting the sales goals that we want to achieve? Or are they just noise? Are they just measures that aren't relevant? And Daryl's like, wait, what?
I'm like, can
we all had the same reaction.
I know.
All right. I have to share a story. I know we're long. Thanks everybody for hanging around long. I worked inside an organization once. We had a consulting group come in, and they came up with these metrics, and they were required results. So they were R2s is what they were called. And the joke among the people in the sales organization was, I've completely missed my number, but I knocked my R2s out of the park. And that was the running joke. Your team is smart. You hired them for a reason. Say no to R2s.
All right, that looks like a good place to wrap up our discussion of KPIs. Thanks for joining us in the Sales SOS podcast. And if you're joining us on LinkedIn Live, we'll see you next month, the second Friday. And everybody have a great weekend.
Bye, all.
See you later, guys.
Thanks for joining us. All right, off we go. Have a great day, everybody.